What kind of a world do we want to live in? This podcast opens the difficult and uncomfortable conversations about crime, addiction, poverty, and more. If we want a healthier community, these messy conversations need to happen. This is Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. So happy to be here with Devon Clunis, former chief of police here in Winnipeg, and to have a part in a conversation regarding policing. Very, very important topic. And the way we do these conversations, our podcast is called Dangerous Ideas for Social Change, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but what it is we want to have the full conversation, and we want to make room for mistakes. We're doing thought experiments around how can we do policing better? How can we do what we do here in our community, where policing is deeply needed? Mm-hmm. How can we do it better? And we're willing to look at any ideas, because we're kind of in, what's that saying? Desperate times, desperate measures. And so, Devon, welcome to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change. Let's just start out with the question I tend to start out with. How did you end up becoming a police officer? Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Very happy to be here with you, by the way. And dangerous conversations, I would say. Authentically dangerous is where I'm going to bring you.
I love it.
Truly authentic.
Maybe we'll change the title of the podcast.
I love it. You don't have to change the title. We're right here, I would say, in the heart of the North End, which is where I grew up. And my junior high school, Isaac Newton, just had their 100th anniversary. They invited me back, and I had forgotten this when a couple of the individuals reminded me that, Devon, when you were here, you always told us you'd become a police officer because you wanted to change the way that people saw the relationship between people of color and police, all the way back in the 1970s in this city.
So interesting.
And when you look at where we're at today, I think we're almost in a very similar place. So why did I get into policing? It was simply because I wanted to change the way things are occurring right here in the North End, but also societally speaking. That's what led me into police. It wasn't about the trappings of the uniform or carrying a gun or arresting bad guys. I thought as a police officer, I could actually help to drive social change. So that's radically different.
Yeah. In your estimation, I know you don't speak for all police officers everywhere, is that generally the heart of police officers? Is it about service? Is it about wanting to be a part of something bigger?
I would say 99%. When you ask a brand new recruit, candidate to become a police officer, why do you want to be a police officer? The number one response you typically will get is, we want to help people. And that really is at the heart of every police officer. That's what you will find. I often like to tell people that when everyone else is running away from danger, there are a few individuals in society who will actually rush towards it. You'll have firefighters for certain, but police officers will put their lives on the line every single day in this city and worldwide for total strangers because they want to help. They want to make things better.
Amazing. So on a certain level, these are heroes. And yet, we're going to get into this. Mm-hmm. We know that sometimes they're demonized, but what you're describing is hearts willing to serve. So, so you had that early on ambitious goal, restoring reconciliation between races. Mm-hmm. Did you accomplish that? What did you set out to achieve? That was your goal. Is it done, or is it a work in progress?
I would say it is a work in progress, but I can tell you in this city, I feel that we have accomplished a great deal. And again, it was really interesting in the last month. I had a chance to go back to I went back to my elementary school, Elwick Community School.
Great school.
Fantastic
I
school.
recently visited it.
Yeah, when I was there,
we were together.
Exactly.
Just epiphany, yeah.
When I arrived in 1975 at Elwick, there were very few people who looked like me. You know that when we went back, you look at the student population, highly indigenous, incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
Very similar situation, Isaac Newton. Now it's apparently 30+% Filipino, 40% indigenous. It's nowhere near that when I was there. And then St. John's High School. And so in terms of building these relationships to make us very culturally inclusive, yes, I feel really good about the work that, occurred over my tenure as a police officer, not taking responsibility for all of that. but I feel that the city certainly has shifted. And I feel like as an individual police officer and as an organization, yes, we fully accomplished, what was in that teenager's mind's eye when I said I was going to become a police officer. So I feel very proud about that. Yes.
Yeah. So then you had you've done your hard time in terms of work out on the street and the heavy lifting. Then you were invited into that role as chief, and curious why did you say yes to that?
Yeah. Again, when I decided I was going to be a police officer, never once thought about being a chief of police. For me, every part of my career really was about service. But even when I applied, I said I would do 25 years. And so my 25 years would have been in 2012. And I was planning to retire September of 2012. But then our chief at the time, Chief McCaskill, announced his retirement. And I thought, we have to serve. One of us has to serve. And I went to both deputies and I asked them, will you take the job? They weren't interested. So I went to every superintendent and I said, we have a responsibility to our people. First, to the members of the service, but also to our city. Like, we have to serve. We know our city. We can certainly have somebody coming from the outside who simply wants to have the title. And so, I'm a person of faith, so I'm going to be very open with you here.
That's cool.
I said, okay, God, you know what? I'm going to apply. And if it's your desire that I get this job, then I will serve. But my whole purpose, once I received the position of chief of police, was I need to prepare the next person, because it really wasn't my desire. I have other things I want to do. So I took on the role simply because I felt it was my call to serve as a chief of police at the time. That's where I went with it.
So interesting, because, I think from a distance, people look at police and they see power.
Yes.
They see the gun, they see the role, and so, but what you're describing is you didn't want that role for power. You wanted it for service, and maybe is that the ideal leader? If we're going to talk, those Old Testament prophets that took on these big assignments, they never wanted to do it.
Yep.
And but there was something that drew you, and
so if you looked at the way I led during my time, and I always tell people this was my leadership philosophy or principle. It's people first, inside out. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is that every single member of the organization had a chance to see me face to face, and I would say to them, and I did this every time I moved up the ranks. I would go to a particular unit or division or the membership, and I said, I'm here to serve you. And even now people say, you're the boss of all those people. I said, no. And this just recently happened. I'm talking within the week. And I said, no, I'm never their boss. I'm the guy who served to make sure they had everything they need internally so that they're healthy. They're coming to a workplace where they're feeling purpose and they're feeling fulfilled. And then I ensured they had all the tools that they needed to do the job effectively. And all I said to the members was this: when you go out there now and you're serving the community, I want you to apply the first principle. You might come up against somebody who's calling you the worst names whatsoever, but you don't know what's going on in their lives. So try to appreciate or understand that. And then, even though maybe it's not necessarily a crime issue, let's see if we can connect them to the right resources in the community so they have everything that they need. And it was amazing when you saw the transformation in our organization when police officers saw beyond just enforcing the law, that they were actually agents of change in the community. Mm-hmm. It was transformational for our city.
Devon, I want to offer up an apology and some praise. I don't know if you remember, you helped us cut the ribbon at the opening of our drop-in center here, and I sort of threw a tongue-in-cheek joke in there. My mother-in-law's comes from Russia, and she always offers these sayings, and she said she would say, "The Tsar is very powerful and lives far away in Moscow." And I made that joke in the moment without explaining it. So I'm like, I just compared our chief of police to the Tsar, but it wasn't that. I was making the point. This is the praise piece. Is this, you were the first chief of police that I saw come close to the people.
I appreciate that. And as I said, when people ask me, is there anything that you did well? That's exactly what I would say, Kent. Yeah. I was out there. I was with the people, because how are you going to serve people if you don't know actually what their needs are? And it went beyond just enforcing the law. So even within the organization, as I said, every single member of the organization had a chance to see and hear me face to face. And it wasn't a one-time event.
Yeah.
It was consistent.
I know that our community poverty is just devastating, and the poor are used to being acted upon,
Mm-hmm.
and so when you started to do consultations and meet with community groups and listen to people, that was new. And so it had a validating kind of impact where people could see that this person isn't just going to act upon us. He's gonna listen. He's gonna offer a place for them to air their concerns, and so that's a compliment. And so when you think about your time as chief of police, what do you feel was your maybe your biggest accomplishment or accomplishments?
When I came in as chief of police, we were still back then murder and crime capital of the country. And what politicians would typically do would give us more money for more boots on the ground. I went to my premier and I said, no more money for policing, if you can believe that. So I would say we were the original defunders, but hear me out.
Wow, Devon.
And I said, but I'll make this, it'll be a political win for you, because I do believe it's about galvanizing the people. It's not about a few of us trying to resolve all these issues, about all of us being a part of it. So I said, no more money for policing. And I said, we will no longer be policing status quo. We're going to use a methodology of crime prevention through social development, where we need to start dealing with the root causes. Mm-hmm. So really trying to educate the populace to say, crime is really just a symptom of something that's deeper within our community that we all have a responsibility to address. And I can tell you that people actually saw and they bought into that. And there was a period of time where it's almost every day somebody would be coming to me and saying, Chief, we want to be a part of that. And I can tell you the first year we saw the biggest drop in crime in our city, 13.9%, with no additional expenditures on policing. And I can tell you at the end of every year, I wouldn't have to go to the city and say, more money. We actually had a surplus that we would give back. So I would say, if anything that you asked me what I feel was my greatest accomplishment, it was building that sense of cohesion within all areas of our city. And I always said, let's get away from talking about the North End or the inner city. It's our North End. It's our inner city. And one of the proudest things that we did, during my time, if you might recall, we had an event we call Restore Our Core.
I do remember.
We came down to the inner city here, Selkirk Avenue, and it was all funded by private citizens. And we restored Selkirk Avenue because it was the first place I lived when I first arrived in this country. And I remember at one point going to a meeting and seeing like a toilet, an old toilet out on the front street of Selkirk Avenue. And I thought, how would people feel living in an environment like that? We can restore it. And for me, it was really an indication of restoring our city to the best that it could be. And it was amazing to see how many people came to the North End and helped to restore, this prominent piece of our city.
Your idea was not, we're going to arrest our way out of this problem that we have in the city.
No.
Yeah. So today, Winnipeg as a whole has a murder rate of 4.4 per 100,000. The North End, just throw some stats out. The North End has a murder rate of 102 per 100,000. So that is, in contrast to the worst city in the world, Tijuana, is 131 per 100,000. On the topic of violent crime, St. Boniface last year had 378 violent crimes. The North End had 4,200 violent crimes. So you're citing a time when crime was at its peak, and right now, in contrast, East Vancouver is often cited as one of the most challenging postal codes, and they have a murder rate of, I believe it's 65 per 100,000. So for our perspective as a community agency, we're about relationships, and so it's very personal. And when there's a violent crime, sometimes we'll get a call from the media like give commentary, and so you can offer commentary, but we know that that's only for like a 24-hour news cycle, and then those stats get forgotten because the rest of the city is is relatively crime free in contrast, right? So yeah, big lead up to the question. How do you feel about our city today?
I've always been very hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
and I continue to be hopeful because I believe what's painfully lacking right now is that sense of, I talked about the community cohesion, the sense of us. The last 3 years, I think, has been very challenging globally. When you look at what's happening within our city, people were incredibly isolated, and so we have lost that sense. So where my hope lies is that, we can rebuild that sense of it is us. It is not just the North End or the downtown on its own or any area that's having this challenge. That's where the real power lies. And I think sometimes we have lost that sense that the power actually rests within the populace. Sometimes we're looking for government to solve all our problems, or the police service, or any one particular agency. We have lost sight of the power that rests within us as a collective. And I can tell you, I do a lot of work across the United States and across our country, but I'm always looking back to this city because I said if any city can actually do it well and become that shining example, it is us. And so I think we need leaders who are going to reinvigorate the people, rebuild that sense of community. And that's where the real hope and the solution lies. It's not in waiting for any one particular individual or government to resolve this. We have all the pieces right here in this city. And so that's why when you call to do a podcast like this, I want to do it because I want to remind us of who we are and point us to who we can become again in the city.
Sometimes I say, we are the people we have been waiting for.
Yes, well said.
And
Well
and
said.
so when I think about a couple of years ago, we had a series. We lost 3 of our youth that we knew within a 9-day period. 2-year-old murdered, 14-year-old beautiful girl murdered, and a 23-year-old young man, gang involved, was murdered. And so we had a community meeting, and we had probably close to 600 people in attendance. And it was very interesting because I'm always interested about the view on policing. So from people who view it from a distant have a certain kind of view, but when again you get closer to reality, there's a different view. So the community expressed surprising messaging. The community expressed that we needed more police, not less. They called for a quicker response time, not defunding. They also, rhymed with the idea of like, we can do this. There was a sense of empowerment in that room. It was about a 2-hour meeting, very, very encouraging, and very much kind of reasoned, where the community sees that, where policing is bad, we need to call it out.
Yes, absolutely.
But realizing that we can't, you can't just make the change with social services. Like, we're one of those agencies, I should believe, I would be the one to say, like, what, we don't need policing because we got this. But I don't believe that. I know that it takes all of us to make this thing work. So the message from a distance contrasts what I hear in the community. In the community, I hear, by and large, support for policing. But from a distance, I hear cops are racist.
Yep.
Cops are abusive.
Yep.
Cops are just power hungry.
Yep.
How do you handle that, Devon?
So here's how we handle that. And, you're absolutely correct. When we see police officer doing bad things, we need to call it out. And I would say in the past, that's where we have failed in terms of policing and policing leadership. The most recent one that really galvanized the entire globe, the killing of George Floyd. I'm a retired police officer. I'm watching that in my living room, and I'm in tears. I'm in tears as a black person who's worked, in both countries, lived and worked in both countries, police officer and civilian. But at the time, I was in tears because I knew what was going to happen to police officers generally. I just knew the label if police leaders didn't step up. And I'm waiting, Kent, I'm telling you, I'm like, please, you better start speaking, otherwise really bad things are going to happen. And it didn't take long for us to start seeing cities burning in the U.S. because police leaders did not stand up and decry that horrendous act by somebody wearing the uniform. And then people started calling me literally from across the globe, as far away as Australia and Germany. And I thought, I am not an active chief, but I have to speak because, again, just like that little boy in the 1970s, I have to try to build that bridge. So I started calling out what we were witnessing and saying clearly that does not represent policing. As I told you earlier, the average police officer will put their lives on the line for anyone, and what we're seeing there does not represent policing. But something else which is also important, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I'm going to say it here. American policing does not represent Canadian policing. And I'm not saying that we're perfect in Canada, but we're at a totally different place. As I said, I've lived and worked and continue to in both nations, and I know the difference between American policing and Canadian policing. And so those are the things we need to talk about, recognize, and totally admit, yes, there are negative things that do occur, but here's a challenge with policing. It's always on the front lines, so it's very visible. The things that we're talking about here happen probably in every sector of society. And we don't suddenly say because bad things happen in education or in the medical field, let's just abandon the medical field or abandon education. No, we need to deal with the negative things that do occur in policing, but recognize that 99.9%, they're out there, they're on the front lines, they're protecting you, they're protecting me. They're actually ensuring that we have what we call civil society.
Yeah. Rafael Mangual, in his book on policing, talks about that distance, right, where we have a few incidents that are very, very negative, but that's contrasted against 25 million interactions in the U.S., just citing U.S. data.
Yes.
And so those are the ones, though, that the light gets, there's a bright light on that, and then we transpose out of context. We say,
Yes.
okay, well, that's Canada
Yes.
then
Yes.
as well. So one thing that I found interesting about that moment is, to my knowledge, the only time when both left and right and everyone seemed galvanized on, decrying what happened there. Like it seemed like we all agreed, this is horrible.
Oh, absolutely.
This is absolutely horrible. And it would have been interesting if we had said, okay, we're in agreement. This is horrible.
Yes.
And been able to move forward with that.
Far more swiftly.
I'm curious, then help us understand, how is Canadian policing different than American policing?
In Canada, generally speaking, police really see themselves more as the protectors. We use this protector mentality. In the United States, it's all about their warriors. They're out there just to fight. As I told you earlier, I talked about crime prevention through social development. You talk to the typical recruit in the United States, why do you want to become a police? I want to go out there and I want to fight the bad guys. I told you earlier.
War on drugs.
Yeah, you talk to a recruit in Canada, I want to help people. There's a total different mindset in terms of policing, and really it's about just the way the two countries are socially different. In the United States, almost everyone, you have a gun. Every time a police officer is stopping someone, they have to be so aware that that individual more than likely has a weapon. Every vehicle you're passing, that is not the same mindset an officer has to move through in their career in Canada, and it creates a whole different mentality. And again, not being critical, just saying that we're two totally different countries socially. And so when people try to say, no, it's exactly the same in the United States and Canada, I say, no, we need to understand, if you go back just to the foundations of the nations and what people see as their rights right now, it's significantly different, and that impacts the way that we police and the philosophy and the principles that we bring to policing. For example, there's a number of years ago, Perlene and I were driving back from the US, and they were talking about these new tactics that they're employing in policing, right? They're talking about this incredible new tactics, de-escalation. I was a recruit 35 plus years ago. We were learning de-escalation back then. And so it's really important for us to educate our public about how different we are in terms of, again, the socialization of the countries, but when it comes down to policing, totally different foundational principles in terms of how we see our role in community.
So then how, as Canadians, have we gotten this so wrong? How is it that we don't understand this? Like, this is epiphany. What you're describing makes sense. But it seems I'm frustrated with the lack of proactive communication from policing. I think that everyone's so measured, and so we have incidents that take place that are really, really difficult. But it seems like the communication, they hold off. They take the hits, they take the criticisms, they take the attack, and then at some point, they might offer up an explanation. I find it's really sort of a cowardly approach. It seems like we're afraid to say, wait, things were more complicated. I know we had an incident 5 years ago, which I had to debrief a number of neighbors on. Suicide by cop. A young man whom we've known since he was little. Just a moment of just crazed, sort of drug-fueled violence. Drew his gun on the police, and the police had to shoot and kill him. And so that goes out to the media, and the optics on that are horrible, right? But as I talked with eyewitnesses, they had no choice. Now, things are complicated, and I'm sure the family of this young man would have, counterpoints to that, but I could see the complexity. And I was curious, why are we not getting this message out?
Yeah, and that was probably one of my biggest frustrations when I first sat in the chair as chief of police, and we had a major incident in the city, and my mindset was, okay, let's get this out. And the immediate no, we can't. So my question was, why can't we? Is it going to jeopardize the investigation? If there's nothing negative going to come out, why can't we tell the people, what we can? And if we can't tell you something, let's tell you why you can't. Police in the past were very slow to make that significant shift, right? If there's anything I would say about American policing, they probably had this better than we did because they would get information out in a timely manner. We're doing much better now, and we're continuing to evolve. And that's part of the work that I do now. Like I said, right across North America, I do operational reviews and write strategic plans. And we talk about this, that you need to be constantly communicating proactively, having these sessions with the public, not just during times of crisis, but actually when nothing bad's going on, so that when crisis does occur, it's not the first time people are hearing from you. So we are making that shift, but we were very slow to do it, and it was incredibly frustrating. But I think police are learning, and they're evolving. But in the past, it was status quo. Why can't we do it? That's just the way we've always done it. No, we need to be evolving. And so I can tell you they definitely are on that path, and current leaders are much more aware of that. So it is happening now, but it was very frustrating in the past.
I guess when an incident takes place and gets caught on social media, that can spread like wildfire. And so hopefully we'll be able to match kind of the pace so that we can have answers before we foment kind of all that anger that can come from some of these situations. All right. So then a question around media. So you've got an incident that takes place, and now the media reports on that incident. What role does media play, positive or negative, on the issue of policing? You're shaking your head for our viewers. Yeah. I can hardly wait for the answer.
The media plays a significant role in creating the image in terms of how they portray a particular story. So early in my career, I had a conversation with media when I simply said to them, you need to recognize you have this incredible role. Like, how you report the story will determine how people will see it and how they will act on it. And at the time, they told me, that's really not our responsibility. I said, absolutely. So you need to also report on the good stories. No, if it bleeds, it leads. And I said, then what kind of a community are we creating if the entire perception we're putting out consistently is that there's only real negative things occurring in our community? So I literally challenged media and said, no, you can't do that because you're actually creating the environment. And so we need to do better. We need to report all of the good things that are occurring, because there's far more good things happening in our community on any given day than what typically leads the news. So media has this massive responsibility. So part of what I said I would start doing then, I said, okay, if you're not going to report the entire story, every time there's an interview, I'm going to tape the entire interview, and we're putting the entire interview out. So you can't just pick the pieces that you want and create a certain perspective. And so that's part of how, and I think in this day of social media where everything is so readily available, we, in terms of policing or anybody else, you have a responsibility then, because people can consume news how they desire now. And that actually forces the media to report ethically, because in the past, as I said, they would create a certain perception based on which snippets they want to report on. And that creates a whole different mindset. So media has a significant role, but they need to recognize, yes, they have to report. And for them, this is a monetary, it's commercial, but you also have a social responsibility to your community, not to paint it consistently in this negative light.
100%.
Yeah.
In the 90s, when gangs were just getting going, we had to negotiate with the media. What they were doing is they would report when an incident took place, a violent crime, and if it was an adult, the name would be given and the name of the gang. And so what we were finding was these guys were clipping the articles, and it was like, cred. And they'd hang it on their wall. And so something as simple as like no longer listing,
Yes.
it was Indian Posse that committed the following violent act, something as simple as that. So yeah, I think media has a major role to play. Just touching on, I'll give you a story that's a hybrid of something. There's permutations of this story or iterations of this story over and over and over. Someone we know that we work with, an individual attempted to break into their home and got in. They, got on 911, almost killed their 3-year-old, tried to attack them. The police arrived, arrested the individual, and 3 hours later, he came back to complete the attack. And no one died, but and again, when we think about this recent incident in Saskatchewan on that reserve where 11 people were murdered, and the individual that committed the murder had 110 charges prior. Think of data out of Vancouver, where 157 individuals committed 6,500 crimes, and so I'm seeing a really weird rewards incentive structure that's been set up that people from a distance don't know how to interpret. So let me try this. This is my unformed thoughts here, but what it basically is that if you're not arresting an individual and holding, like carrying and containing for that problem individual, then there's this cascading effect where then people in our community give up even calling the police. Police officers say, I'm going to arrest this individual. He's going to be out in a few hours. So that incentivizes the wrong thing with the police force. And so I just see so many, the cascading effect of that, how it, what for the offender, they conclude that I'm invincible. I can just keep doing this. We have known like gang members who have said to us, I was released. I have no idea why they released me for what I did. And so that's, so we have this spike in crime. But back at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about was the early 90s where there was crime was really spiking. Something different is happening now. Can you help our audience kind of understand that?
Yeah, you talk about the complexities of the system, and I would say that's the injustice in our justice system, right? Sometimes people try to say that is the kind thing to do. Well, it's not really the kind thing to do because, like you said, people within the community are suffering, and the individuals themselves who maybe if they were incarcerated with, given some real opportunities to correct the behavior, something good could come of it. But no, we're taking the easy way out. And that's what we're doing in the system in many occasions. We're just taking the easy way out. And then who's suffering? The rest of society is suffering. As I said, that's the injustice in the system, but the only way that real meaningful change is going to come, again, is from the populace. No, I'm not saying we need to incarcerate everyone for this inordinate amount of time, but when somebody's coming in this many offenses, something has to change. And it can't be this constant catch and release, which frustrates the police officers who are doing their job. But as I said, this is the complexity of the system, and sometimes people will look at that and simply say that it's the police who are not doing their job. There's only so much that the police can do, and then it's handed off to somebody else to make that decision, and then it just comes back to us. I remember very early in my career, and this is where I think the greatest failure lies, is when we're dealing with young people. And young people would be arrested, would be released, and I was at court, and here this one young person saying to another one, well, why don't you commit this crime, because then you'll get actually put in the youth center, and it's just great there. No, I'm not saying that we have to be tyrants. But a young person should not be looking at going to the youth center as, oh, this is like a holiday and it's a vacation. There has to be a balance that can be struck, because right now within the youth criminal justice system, there is no real major deterrent. And as I said, I'm not saying that we have to treat young people like we're tyrants. No. But actually, I think they should be afraid of actually ending up in the youth center. I'm not saying that it's going to be a vacation.
Right.
We do better for young people when we make sure that they want to stay so much on the straight and narrow, so to speak. So when you look at our entire system right now, there's a lot of injustice in the justice system, because it's not really about the individual and actually caring for them. It's what is the easiest or most cost-effective thing for us to do, as opposed to what is the right thing for the future of that young person and for society as a whole. We need to reframe it.
Yes, and sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, to that old song. It seems there's also the thing about doing harm shrouded as virtue, and it's kind of the idea that some of the things we do are supposed to look virtuous, but in the end they cause harm. One interesting sort of recent realization I had is 10 years ago we had 210 to 230 spots for youth who commit crime, and this year we have 80 spots. And while we're seeing, just recently we had a 14-year-old commit murder and a 15-year-old commit a murder, and so we're seeing since 2015 we're seeing about a 30% increase in violent crime with youth, and so there again, I quote Thomas Sowell. He's somebody I just loved reading. He says that any social effort is a success by sufficiently low standard. And so if our measure is the reduction of youth being incarcerated, we have succeeded in spades. It's been a great success. But I don't see what's happening in the streets as a success.
Correct. So that should not be the measure. That's exactly what I was saying. We think we're being kind, but we're not, because now those young people are set free to commit additional crimes, and it's set their lives on this real destructive path. But think about all the collateral damage, all the victims that's laying in their wake now, simply because we didn't deal with it at the front end when we had an opportunity at the first or second instance to really say, you know what, no, you need to change. But no, we take a very minimalistic approach. Just put you back out. And there is no deterrent. Any of us who have raised kids know that, okay, there needs to be, and I don't use punishment in the term of like what happened in the whole country for me. I'm not talking about spanking and beating kids, but you need to know that there's a consequence to your action. Unfortunately, right now, in a lot of what we're doing in terms of youth criminal justice, there is no consequence. And what does that tell a young person? I can just keep doing this and keep doing this. But the consequence is that it wrecks their future and the future of many of their victims. We're doing a horrible job in terms of youth criminal justice at this point in our country.
I agree. I heard a story about a youth recently who told someone, I can't stop myself. I'm going to commit murder. I'm going to kill someone. And they were being released. They had been involved in an assault that a swarm was a group of kids that jumped another kid. And you could see the escalation. And I know that we hear from often people caught up in addiction is that when an individual is incarcerated, their social group will breathe a sigh of relief, because they know that is a reset moment. That's a chance for them to break that cycle that they're on. And again, for this individual that could see themselves about to commit murder, had we interrupted that and given them a reset, given them a chance to think.
So let me share this one story with you again. When I was still a constable, I was involved in a program called Choices Youth Program. And at St. John's High School, of all places, my old school. And this were for kids who were on the margins or kids who were actually involved in crime. Some were gang members. And I'm in uniform, and I'm speaking with these kids at St. John's. And we're having a long discussion about their interactions with police and with the criminal justice system. And finally, I just said, okay, let me just ask you point blank, what is it that you want? See, we think they'd want no more police, no more law, no more. And the one young man just stood up and said, you know what? All we really want is somebody to tell us what to do. But there's a mindset that the kids just tell us what they want, what they need, and then we do that. But here's somebody who's actually involved in the system, who now has the opportunity to say, give me my freedom. What? No, we want someone who would actually tell us, because I really think that is the caring thing to do. We're going to listen, certainly, but hopefully because we're a little bit older, we should have some wisdom. We've been down the road. Can't we point these kids in the right direction rather than just bringing them in, letting them out, sending them back free?
Right.
When you look at, a system, some of our systems that we have in place where a child turns 18 and we think just because they're 18 now suddenly they're an adult, they can do whatever they want. How many of us actually know the right path when we're 18 years old, especially if you haven't, been in the healthiest environment growing up? We're not being very kind to all these young people, and we're setting our society up for continuous failure. So that's why, for me, crime prevention through social development is all part of that. It's very complex. You can't just deal with the crime.
Yeah, I think about the idea of the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Mm-hmm.
There's when you have expectations for youth, it's really a statement of value. It's like, and we hear this here. We do leadership development here, and we hear youth say, so many people, when they think of the North End and they think of youth, they think, they're bad kids, gang involved, or they say, what do you need? And our question is always, what do you have to offer? So it's like these youth have gifts to give. And it's when we say, we're not going to tolerate that behavior because we see a greater depth in you. And so the concern that we let this crime keep going, we're kind of saying, hey, it's what you do. Yeah. We know you can't do better. We talked a little bit about this decarceration, reduction, and saying, well, that's not kind of it. And then there's in our community, I see signs that defund the police. Winnipeg police cause harm. I don't know. In a sad irony, it's actually the signs only went up like 2 times, and the community vandalized the signs right away. So so there's this weird call for. It's like we've forgotten what we've always known.
Yeah.
We know what people are like. You've talked about human nature. Like if you don't interrupt that cycle, people just tend to keep going, or it gets worse. It devolves. So have we lost our mind? Have we lost our way as a society?
As I said, I would say we've lost our perspective. Maybe our vision is somewhat clouded. And so what I love to do with people who say Winnipeg police cause harm, I like to do exactly what we're doing here. I would like to bring you in. Let's have a conversation. What do you mean by that?
Right.
And I would love if every single Winnipegger could, I really wish, could go on a ride along with their police and see what they're dealing with and tell me how you could possibly say it's the police that cause harm when you look at what's going on in society. And I often ask people, let's imagine our city for 1 hour without any police. Do you think there'd be a lot of harm caused by a lot of people? Without a shadow of a doubt. So as we said earlier, when a police officer, is involved in something which is horrendous, we need to call it out. That's an individual causing harm. It happens everywhere. But for you to make this blanket statement, and I recently heard someone say like every single police officer is out to do harm. I'm like, it's hard. Yeah, absolutely.
Come on.
But I like to have a conversation, just sit down. What do you mean by that? Where is it coming from? Is it somebody just looking for their 15 minutes of fame? Because right now that's just a hot topic and you can get away with saying that. But I think sometimes people get away with saying that because we don't challenge it enough. So I will stand and challenge anyone. I'll tell you all my incidents of dealing with police and what they do, and you tell me where you get that perception. And again, a lot of that is just from one incident that I see on media, and so we deal with it. I've spoken with a lot of people, for example, in terms of the black police issue, people saying that, for example, with SROs, Indigenous and black kids are disadvantaged by it. And so I've been having my own informal survey, Kent, over the last couple of years. Every young black person I'll meet, what's been your experience with policing? To this point, I have not had one who's told me that they've had this negative interaction with police. But that's a perception right now that's being fed.
Yeah, we had one of our former staff who had been deeply involved in gangs said the only people that like the idea of defunding the police is gang members and suburban moms. So, take that for what it is. It's, again, folks who are distant and the people who know that, that would be great. would be a heyday if we just defunded the whole thing. It would be
No,
open season. So we've talked about, that profile on policing, service oriented.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about some of the challenges in our city, escalation in crime, and talk a little bit about we've lost a number of police officers this year, and talk to us about that.
My heart breaks with that. In the past, we know that in the U.S. they lose a significant number of police officers, but for us to lose one or two in our country in the past, that would be an epidemic. But in the last 11 months, we've lost probably 10 plus police officers in the line of duty in Canada, unheard of. Now, I often like to tell people that I liken this back to the early years of mining, when they would take the canary down into the coal mine. Canary succumbs. We know that something in this environment is not good for the rest of us. We need to get out. I see what's happening with police officers now, similar to the canary in that coal mine, because I say if this is happening to police officers who are on the front lines, creating and protecting our civil society, what do you think is going to be happening to the rest of us who aren't wearing the uniform? Something else is at play here in society. When you see the attack on police officers, to me, is an attack on civil society as we know it. And you talk about the type of crimes that are occurring and with young people. That's where this is leading, right? This is just a symptom of something which is much deeper. And so we have to be aware of that. If we're not, we're going to wake up one day and say, where are we? How did we get to this place?
Yeah, I had a recent media interview where the individual asked me the question, could it get worse? Exactly.
Yes, it is.
I said, are you kidding me? We could be living in a virtual hellscape. Recently, speaking with one of my staff, he talked about the fact that we have doubled our murder rate from 6 years ago. If we were to double it again, what would that look like? So
we're on the path.
All right.
We're on the path. Unless somebody steps in and we start having more of these conversations, as I said, to rebuild that sense of cohesion and the sense of humanity, because what's happened over the last number of years, we've become very isolated, tribal, if you want to call it. We don't get back to it's us, and it's not just your group or my group or it's the police. We're definitely on that path.
So let's mark the date, June 27th. Devon Clunis cautioned Winnipeg, rang a bell, and so okay, we've heard that warning, we've heard that caution. Do you see a hopeful road forward? I know you've hinted at it throughout, because we don't want this just to be a disparaging, negative kind of commiseration here.
I never leave. I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel that we didn't have hope. I really believe that the city has a lot of hope. As I've traveled across North America, as I told you, my eyes are always back in this city. There's so much good that's taking place here, but the good never gets the spotlight. And what you feed is what grows. Part of what I want to do and what you're doing is I want to have more of these types of conversations. And as I said earlier, remind our people of who we are and point us to who we can become. There's a lot of hope in this city. And the only thing that's taken away from it right now is what we're feeding. Let's you and myself and others like us continue to feed the good while we deal with the negative challenges. And we don't have to wait for government to solve it. The power lies within us as the people. This is where we're going. Totally hopeful for this city. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in that.
Such a good word, Devon. I got to ask you, just kind of as a... you look like you're 35, Devon. So when you talk about retirement, it's ridiculous. Some of us 58-year-olds kind of resent you a little, to be honest. But anyhow, you've given a career to it, and you are sort of retired, I suppose. Would you do it again?
What a great question, sir. I have to tell you, I've been thinking about that a lot. As I said, I've been in the consulting world now right across North America for the last 7 years. I've seen what's good, seen what's not so good, but everything I come back to is just how great this city is. So what I've learned to do is never say never.
That's an answer. That's an answer. Well, I appreciate your optimism. I appreciate your insights. It's a vitally important topic, and and you've given us a lot to chew on. If people want to ask questions, there's ways to post that. We'll leave links connected to this podcast. Throw those questions out. And Devon, thank you for this time. Thank you for your contributions to our city. Thank you for your tenacious vision. And we appreciate your service and appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Ideas for Social Change.